Sarah's hands trembled as she pulled the crumpled deed from her purse, the officer's flashlights cutting through the darkness of what Karen claimed was her backyard. "This is my property," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over Karen's. Shrill demands to have her arrested for trespassing. The lead officer studied the document, his expression shifting from skepticism to something Sarah couldn't quite read. Behind him, Karen's face went from smug satisfaction to dawning horror as she realized the papers in Sarah's possession weren't just any deed. They were about to destroy everything she'd built her lies upon. What happened next would expose a web of deception so deep that even the sprinkler system had been running for 3 hours straight, flooding Sarah Chen's vegetable garden and turning her carefully tended soil into a muddy disaster. She stood at her kitchen window, watching the water cascade over her destroyed tomato plants, her jaw clenched so tight her teeth ached. This was the 4th time this month. The back door. I'm done being polite. The October air carried the scent of dying leaves and the distant sound of Karen. Mitchell's voice drifting from the house next door, that same saccharine tone she used when she was pretending to be reasonable. While doing something completely unreasonable, Sarah had lived in this house for 8 years, ever since her divorce, and she'd never had problems with neighbors until the Mitchells moved in 6 months ago. Karen stood in her pristine backyard, more than Sarah's monthly grocery budget, directing to landscapers who were installing what looked like a stone retaining wall, a wall that was clearly being built 3 feet into Sarah's property. "Excuse me," Sarah called out, her voice carrying across the chain-link fence that separated their yards. "Karen, we need to talk." Karen turned with that practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Oh, Sarah, how are you, honey? Isn't this weather just gorgeous? Perfect for getting some yard work done." She'd been dealing with Karen's passive-aggressive behavior for months. Now the deliberately loud music during Sarah's night shifts, the trash, cans mysteriously moved to block Sarah's driveway, the sprinkler system that somehow always malfunctioned in Sarah's direction. But this was different. This was theft. "Your contractors are building on my property," Sarah said, pointing at the half-constructed wall. "That's my land they're digging up." Karen's laugh was like wind chimes in a hurricane, pretty on the surface, but utterly wrong for the situation. "Oh, sweetie, I think you're confused. This has always been our property line. Maybe you should check your boundaries before making accusations." To women, Sarah could see the uncertainty in his eyes. He'd clearly been hired to do a job, not referee a property dispute. "I'm not confused," Sarah said, her voice getting louder despite her efforts to stay calm. "I had a survey done when I bought this house. That wall is being built 3 feet into my yard." "Had done," Karen replied, her smile growing wider and more condescending. "But Bob and I had a proper survey completed just last month. This is definitely our property." She gestured grandly at the space around her, as if she were showing off a mansion instead of a suburban backyard. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. 6 feet, Karen, that's impossible. My garden has been there for, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to ask you to remove those vegetable plants," Karen interrupted, her voice taking on that fake sweet tone that made Sarah's skin crawl. "They're on our property, and honestly, they're bringing down the aesthetic of the neighborhood. We're trying to create something beautiful here." The landscaper who'd been watching the exchange cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said to Karen, "maybe we should wait until—" No, keep working," Karen said firmly. "We're paying you to do a job, and I expect you to do it. Don't let her intimidate you. Life miserable for half a year." The calculated cruelty in Karen's eyes was unmistakable. "Now this wasn't about property lines or aesthetics," Sarah said, her voice deadly quiet. "You're right. Let's settle this properly." She turned and walked back toward her house, ignoring Karen's calls of, "I'm glad you're being reasonable about this." Sarah's hands shook as she unlocked her back door, not from fear, but from the kind of rage that came from months of being treated like she didn't matter. Inside, she went straight to her home office and pulled out the fireproof filing cabinet where she kept her important documents. The original deed was there, along with the survey she'd had done before purchasing the house and the property tax records going back a decade. But there was something else, something she'd discovered 3 weeks ago when she'd started researching the property dispute. Her phone buzzed with a text from her neighbor across the street. "Saw Karen's contractors. Want me to call the police?" Sarah smiled grimly as she typed back, "Not yet, but maybe keep an eye out." She gathered her documents and headed back outside, where Karen was now standing with her arms crossed, watching the landscapers continue their work. Higher, and Sarah could see they'd already torn up several of her pepper plants. "I have my documents right here," Sarah announced, holding up the folder. Karen's expression flickered, for just a moment, a micro-expression that Sarah might have missed if she hadn't been watching carefully. "Oh, honey, I don't carry my paperwork around with me." "Then let's go get it," Sarah said. "I'll wait." "I don't think that's necessary," Karen replied, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "I'm sure whatever you have there is just ... Well, everyone makes mistakes." Sarah opened her folder and pulled out the survey map, holding it up so Karen could see it. "This is a certified survey from Morrison & Associates. They've been surveying properties in this area for 30 years. According to this, your retaining wall is being built 3 feet into my property." Karen barely glanced at the paper. "Well, I'm sure they're very nice people, but like I said, we had our own survey done. A more recent one, and it clearly shows that this land belongs to us." "By whom?" Sarah asked. "What company?" "I don't see why that matters," Karen said, but Sarah caught the slight hesitation in her voice. "Because it matters to me. Because if you're going to destroy my garden and claim my property, I want to know who told you that you had the right to do it." Karen's smile was becoming more strained by the minute. "Look, I don't appreciate your tone. Bob and I are trying to improve the neighborhood, and frankly, me. Show me the survey, right now. Go inside and get it, and let's put this to rest once and for all." For a long moment, the two women stared at each other across the fence. Sarah could see the calculation happening behind Karen's eyes, the rapid assessment of options, the weighing of risks and benefits that she'd probably done 1,000 times before in 1,000 different situations. "I don't have to show you anything," Karen finally said. "This is our property, and we don't need your permission to improve it." Made Karen's eyes narrow. "You do? Because I called the city planning office yesterday." Karen's face went very still. "What did you do?" "I reported an unpermitted construction project being built on disputed property. They're sending someone out to investigate." Sarah checked. Her watch should be here any minute. Actually, the landscaper who'd been listening to the exchange straightened up and looked at his partner. "Maybe we should keep working," Karen snapped. "There's no dispute here. This woman is just trying to cause trouble." The perfectly composed mask was starting to slip, and underneath it was something desperate and ugly. "What I think," Sarah said, her voice conversational, but carrying an undertone of steel. "I think you never had a survey done. Perfect little yard. And you figured I was too timid to fight back." "That's ridiculous," Karen said, but her voice cracked slightly on the last word. "Is it because I did some research, Karen? I looked up the previous owners of your house, the Hendersons. They lived there for 22 years, and they never had any boundary disputes. In fact, Mrs. Henderson and I used to chat over the fence all the time about our gardens. Funny how the property line never seemed to be an issue then." Karen's face was turning red now, the careful composure completely abandoned. The Hendersons were old and probably didn't know any better. Just because they let you get away with trespassing doesn't mean trespassing. Sarah's voice rose. "On my own property. It's not your property," Karen screamed, and for a moment her mask slipped completely. Sarah saw the rage underneath, the entitled. Karen dropped the destroyed plants and took a step backward, her eyes darting between the two officers like a cornered animal. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice had lost all its earlier bravado. Officer Martinez opened his folder and pulled out a photograph. Karen Elizabeth Mitchell, age 34, originally from Phoenix, Arizona. Also known as Karen Walsh, Karen Davidson, and Karen Reynolds. He held up the photo so she could see it. Ring any bells? Sarah watched Karen's face go through a series of transformations: confusion, recognition, terror, and finally, a desperate kind of calculation. "That's not, I don't know what game you're playing, but no games," Martinez said. "We got a call from Phoenix PD about 3 weeks ago. They've been tracking a woman who's been running a very specific kind of scam across multiple states: property fraud, identity theft, harassment campaigns against homeowners to force them to sell below market value." The first officer, whose name tag read Thompson, was now standing directly behind Karen, cutting off any escape route back toward the fence. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to put your hands where I can see them." Karen's laugh was high and brittle. Ask anyone in the neighborhood. We did, Martinez said. Turns out, the house you're living in Nighty belongs to Robert Mitchell, your husband, according to the lease agreement. But here's the interesting part. He flipped through his folder. Robert Mitchell doesn't exist. The credit history, the employment records, the references all fake, professional grade fake, but fake nonetheless. Sarah felt the world shift. Around her? What are you saying? I'm saying, Martinez continued, his eyes never leaving Karen's face, that your neighbor here is a professional con artist. She targets middle-class neighborhoods, moves in with fake identities, and then systematically harasses homeowners into selling their properties cheap. The profits. Karen's hands were shaking now, but she kept her chin raised defiantly. Prove it. Oh, we can. See, the thing about running cons is that you have to be perfect every time. One mistake, one person who fights back instead of giving in, and the whole thing unravels. He looked at Sarah. Congratulations, Ms. Chen, you just took down a criminal enterprise. Sarah's mind was reeling. The sprinkler system, the loud music, the trash cans. Classic intimidation tactics, Martinez confirmed. Designed to make you miserable enough that you'd be willing to sell for anything just to get away from the harassment. Then her partners would swoop in with a cash offer, probably 20% below market value, and you'd think you were getting rescued from a nightmare neighbor. That's not true, Karen said, but her voice was barely a whisper now. Phoenix PD says you've pulled this scam successfully in at least 6 different cities over the past 4 years, Martinez continued. Always the same pattern. Move into a nice neighborhood, target single women or elderly couples, make their lives hell until they sell cheap. You've made over $2 million doing this. The property line dispute, you knew exactly where the boundaries were. Of course she did, Thompson said. She researched your property thoroughly before moving in. That's why she escalated to property destruction. She was trying to push you over the edge. Karen was looking around desperately now, as if searching for an escape route that didn't exist. You can't prove any of this. It's all speculation. Martinez smiled and pulled out his phone. Actually, we can? See, about an hour ago, we executed a search warrant on your house. Found some very interesting things. He scrolled through photos on his phone, professional fake ID equipment, property values, and sale timelines, and my personal favorite TA spreadsheet tracking your harassment campaigns, complete with notes about which tactics were most effective. Sarah's legs suddenly felt weak. She grabbed the fence post for support, her mind racing back over the past 6 months. Every interaction with Karen took on a new meaning now, not the petty cruelties of a difficult neighbor, but calculated psychological warfare designed to destroy her will to fight. The wall, she said suddenly. You were going to claim I was building on your property, weren't you? Make me look like the crazy neighbor? That's exactly what she was going to do, Thompson confirmed. Force you to prove it was your land, make you spend money on lawyers and surveys, drag it out until you were exhausted and broke. Then her partners would offer to buy your house AZs and handle all the legal problems. Karen's mask slipped completely now, and Sarah saw the cold calculation underneath. You have no idea what you've done, she said, her voice low and venomous. Do you know how much money you've cost me? How long I've been working on this neighborhood? So you admit it, Martinez said, his pen poised over his notepad. Karen realized her mistake immediately, but it was too late. I admit nothing. I want a lawyer. That's your right, Thompson said. But first, you're under arrest for property destruction, harassment, fraud, and criminal conspiracy. He moved behind her and began the process of handcuffing her. You have the right to remain silent. As Thompson read Karen her rights, Sarah found herself thinking about all the nights she'd lain awake, wondering if she was losing her mind, if she was being too sensitive, if she should just give up and move somewhere else. The gaslighting had been so complete, so professional, that she'd started to doubt her own sanity. How many people fell for it? She asked Martinez. Too many, he said grimly. Most of them never realized they were being conned. They just thought they had a nightmare neighbor and were grateful when someone offered to buy their house. They spoke up. What about the construction, the permits? All part of the scam, Martinez explained. Create a boundary dispute, force the homeowner to spend money on lawyers and surveys, then have the work accidentally damage their property while they're fighting it. The insurance claims and legal fees alone are usually enough to make people want to sell. Sarah watched as Thompson guided Karen toward the police car. Her designer workout clothes, now dirty and torn from her rampage through the garden. The woman who'd terrorized her for months looked small and ordinary now. Just another criminal being arrested for fraud. "Wait," Sarah called out. "I need to ask her something." Thompson paused, and Sarah approached Karen, who was standing by the police car with her hands cuffed behind her back. Up close, Sarah could see that her neighbor's perfect makeup was smeared. Her carefully styled hair was disheveled, and her eyes held a kind of desperate fury. "Why me?" Sarah asked. Karen studied her for a long moment, and Sarah saw a flicker of something that might have been respect in her eyes. Single woman, recent divorce, works night shifts, so she's isolated from the neighbors. House is worth about $50,000 more than she paid for it. No kids, no family in the area. She paused. "On paper, you were perfect, vulnerable." But Karen's smile was cold. "But you turned out to be a lot more trouble than you were worth." Thompson opened the car door and helped Karen into the back seat. As the police car pulled away from the curb, Sarah found herself staring at the house next door, the house where she'd thought Bob and Karen Mitchell lived there. Perfect suburban life. "What happens now?" she asked Martinez. Now we finish the investigation. Karen, or whatever her real name is, will probably try to cut a deal by giving up her partners. The house next door will be seized as evidence in a criminal case. And you, ... double quotes, he smiled. You get your garden back. Sarah looked at the destruction Karen had left behind the torn plants, the muddy footprints, the half-built wall that would need to be removed. It would take time to repair the damage, but for the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe. "There's something else," Martinez said, pulling out another set of papers. On Mrs. Henderson across the street, the elderly woman who moved into the assisted living facility last month. Sarah's blood ran cold. Mrs. Henderson was forced to sell. Looks like it. Karen's been at this for longer than we thought. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. Sweet, gentle Mrs. Henderson, who'd lived in her house for 30 years. During the holidays, she told me she was selling because the house was too big for her, Sarah said quietly. Said she wanted to be closer to her daughter. Her daughter lives in Portland, Martinez said, 3,000 miles away. And Mrs. Henderson's savings were wiped out by a series of accidents that happened to her property. Broken windows, damaged roof, mysterious plumbing problems. Her insurance premiums went through the roof, and she couldn't afford. Sarah woke to the sound of her doorbell ringing at 6:47 a.m. She'd barely slept, her mind racing with everything that had happened the day before. The arrest, the revelations about Karen's criminal enterprise, the knowledge that she'd been living next door to a professional con artist for months. She stumbled to the front door in her robe, expecting to see Detective Kim or maybe another officer with follow-up questions. Instead, she found a man in an expensive suit standing on her porch, briefcase in hand, and a smile that reminded her uncomfortably of Karen's fake pleasantries. "Ms. Chen. I'm Robert Davidson, attorney for Pacific Properties. I apologize for the early hour, but I wanted to speak with you before this situation gets any more complicated." Sarah's blood went cold. Pacific Properties. That's the company that bought Mrs. Henderson's house. Among others, yes. "May I come in? I think we can resolve this whole unfortunate misunderstanding very quickly." "Misunderstanding?" Sarah's voice rose. "Your associate was arrested yesterday for fraud, harassment, and criminal conspiracy. What exactly is there to misunderstand?" Davidson's smile never wavered. "I'm afraid you've been given some very incorrect information. Karen Mitchell is not associated with Pacific Properties. She's actually a former employee who was terminated for cause over a year ago. We've been trying to track her down because she's been using our company name to run unauthorized schemes." Sarah stared at him. The man's confidence was absolute. His story delivered with the polished ease of someone who'd practiced it many times. "That's not what the police told me. The police are working with incomplete information," Davidson said smoothly. "We've been cooperating fully with their investigation, and I'm sure once they have all the facts, they'll realize they've made some serious mistakes." He held up his briefcase. "I have documentation here that proves Pacific Properties had nothing to do with Karen Mitchell's activities. Then why are you here?" because Karen Mitchell caused significant damage to your property while falsely claiming to represent our company. We want to make this right." Davidson opened his briefcase and pulled out a check. "We're prepared to offer you $50,000 in compensation for the harassment you've suffered and the damage to your garden." Sarah's mind reeled. $50,000 was more than she made in a year at her job. It was enough to pay off her remaining mortgage, enough to completely renovate her garden, enough to provide financial security she'd never had before. "There's just one small condition," Davidson continued. "We need you to sign a statement saying that Karen Mitchell never claimed to represent Pacific Properties and that you understand she was acting entirely on her own." The pieces clicked together in Sarah's head. "You want me to lie? I want you to tell the truth," Davidson said, his voice taking on a slightly sharper edge. "Karen Mitchell was a rogue employee who was terminated for cause. She had no authority to act on behalf of our company. Signing this statement would simply clarify that fact." Sarah looked at the check in his hand, more money than she'd ever seen at once. Then she thought about Mrs. Henderson, about the other families who'd been driven from their homes, about the contractors who'd been cheated out of their pay. "Get off my property," she said quietly. Davidson's smile faltered for the first time. "Ms. Chen, I don't think you understand the situation you're in. Karen Mitchell is claiming that you conspired with her to defraud Pacific Properties. She's saying you were in on the whole scheme from the beginning. That's ridiculous, is it? You were the one who documented everything so thoroughly. You were the one who called the city planning office at exactly the right time to trigger the investigation. You were the one who had Karen's confession recorded." Davidson's voice was silky now, dangerous. "From a certain perspective, it looks like you were the mastermind and Karen was just the fall guy." Sarah felt the world tilt around her. "That's insane. I was the victim. Were you? Or were you the one who set up the whole elaborate scheme to expose Karen so you could claim victim compensation while your real partners escaped with the money?" Davidson pulled out another set of papers. "We have bank records showing unusual deposits into your account over the past 6 months. We have phone records showing calls between you and known associates of Karen's operation. We have testimony from neighbors saying you seemed unusually well prepared for yesterday's confrontation." "Those deposits were my paychecks from working overtime shifts," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "And I don't know any associates of Karen's operation. Can you prove that?" Davidson asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been planning this for months. And unless you sign this statement admitting that Karen was acting alone, I'm afraid we'll have to share our evidence with the authorities." Sarah stared at the man who was calmly threatening to destroy her life. The check in his hand suddenly looked like a trap instead of compensation. "You're trying to frame me. I'm trying to give you a way out," Davidson said. $50,000, and this whole nightmare goes away. You get to keep your house, your reputation, your freedom. All you have to do is sign a simple statement of fact." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and saw Detective Kim's name. "Need to meet with you ASAP. Something's come up." Davidson noticed her looking at her phone. "I'm sure the detective wants to discuss some new evidence that's come to light. Evidence that might be very difficult for you to explain." He held out a pen. "This offer expires in 5 minutes. Ms. Chen, after that, I'm afraid you'll have to take your chances with the legal system." Sarah looked at the check, at the pen, at the man who was smoothly threatening to destroy her life unless she helped cover up a criminal conspiracy. Everything in her wanted to take the money and make the nightmare go away. $50,000 would change her life. But it would also make her complicit in the destruction of other people's lives. "You know what she said?" taking the check from Davidson's hand. His smile returned. "I knew you'd see reason." Sarah tore the check in half, then in half again, then dropped the pieces on her porch. "I said, get off my property." Davidson's mask slipped completely. "You have no idea what you've just done. We tried to handle this quietly, but you've forced our hand. By tonight, you'll be under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud. Your face will be on every news station in the city. Your neighbors will know you're a criminal. Your employer will fire you. And that little garden you're so proud of, it'll be seized as evidence in a criminal case." "Maybe," Sarah said, "but at least I'll be able to sleep at night." Davidson's eyes were cold now, calculating. "We'll see." About that, he turned and walked toward a black sedan that Sarah hadn't noticed before. As he got in, Sarah saw another man in the passenger seat, someone she didn't recognize, but who was clearly watching her house. Sarah closed her door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. She'd just made an enemy of people who had the resources to destroy her life, and she had no idea how to fight back. Her phone buzzed again with another text from Detective Kim. "Don't talk to anyone until we meet. Trust no one." 45 minutes later, Sarah sat in an interview room at the police station. Detective Kim across from her and Officer Martinez taking notes. The room was small and windowless, with fluorescent lights that made everything look harsh and unforgiving. "Tell me about your conversation with Robert Davidson," Detective Kim said. Sarah recounted the entire encounter. From the early morning visit to the threats and the torn check, Detective Kim listened without interruption, her expression growing, more grim with each detail. "He offered you $50,000 to lie about Karen's connection to Pacific Properties," Detective Kim said when Sarah finished. "Yes, and when I refused, he threatened to frame me as the mastermind behind the whole scheme." Detective Kim exchanged a look with Martinez. "Ms. Chen, I need to tell you something. There is no Robert Davidson working for Pacific Properties." Sarah's stomach dropped. "What? Pacific Properties is a shell company? It exists only on paper. The address on their incorporation documents is a vacant lot in Nevada. The phone number goes to a disconnected voicemail. There are no employees, no offices, no legitimate business operations. Then, who was that man? We don't know yet, but we're going to find out." Detective Kim leaned forward. "What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room. Karen Mitchell isn't talking. She lawyered up the moment she was booked, and she hasn't said a word since. But her phone records are very interesting." Martinez pulled out a folder. "She made 17 calls to the same number in the 6 hours before her arrest. That number traces back to a burner phone that was used to contact several other people. We've been investigating what kind of people. The kind who specialize in making problems disappear," Detective Kim said. "Karen's operation is bigger than we initially thought. Much bigger. What you experienced was just the retail level of a criminal enterprise that spans multiple states and involves millions of dollars." Sarah felt sick. "How many people are involved?" "We're still figuring that out." "But the man who visited you this morning, he's not a lawyer. He's what we call a cleaner, someone who handles witness intimidation, evidence destruction, and other problems that arise when criminal operations get exposed. So when he threatened to frame me, he probably could have done it, Deet.